neighboring peaceful Syria where Bashar al-Assad is in power.
Following airstrikes in Syria, the role of journalism during warfare is brought into question. With a full Supreme Court, what cases will be revisited and what can we expect?
I have no doubt you will go down as one of the truly great justices.
And New York passes its state budget with a treat for in-state college students.
Are we happy to have Secretary Hillary Clinton here today?
All that and more ahead.
This is Talking Points.
Our top story tonight, the United States dropped what's being called the mother of all bombs on ISIS targets in Afghanistan earlier today. Good evening, I'm Josh Carney.
And I'm Mike Riccardi. The 21,000-pound bomb is the largest non-nuclear bomb in the American arsenal. Although originally developed for the Iraq War, this was the first time the weapon has ever been used. The target of the bombing was an ISIS cave and tunnel system in the Nangarhar province of Afghanistan.
The bombing comes just days after nearly 60 Tomahawk missiles were launched at Syria. It is not clear whether any civilians were killed during the Nangarhar bombing. The U.S. forces say they took every precaution to avoid civilian casualties. President Trump called it another successful mission.
If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference, So we have incredible leaders in the military, and we have incredible military, and we are very proud of them. And this was
Joining us now with the latest is Talking Points international correspondent Elijah Sham. Elijah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So last week, a week from tonight, we saw nearly 60 Tomahawk missiles launched at Syria. Today, we saw the biggest non-nuclear weapon bomb dropped in Afghanistan. Why the escalation now? Afghanistan's been pretty quiet in the last recent couple of months.
The thing with Afghanistan is it has been relatively quiet for a very long time, but we've been conducting special forces operations in Nangarhar province for a very long time. And this strike is probably a retaliation for the death of a Green Beret just last week in that same province. So what we're seeing is kind of a shock and awe to this ISIS group that is in Nangarhar province that really isn't that large. We're kind of trying to stamp them out really quickly now.
And do you think the escalation is going to continue?
I think that based on the numbers that ISIS-K has in that region, I think that it's likely to escalate by pure virtue of trying to wipe these people out.
Now, as the global community continues to learn more about the tentacles that is the ISIS brand, it was a specific target on the branch ISIS-K. Now, why was that branch targeted in particular, and who are they?
ISIS-K is ISIS in the Khorasan. Khorasan is kind of the old name for what Afghanistan was called in ancient times. ISIS-K is the first non-Arab branch of ISIS, but it's interesting because it hasn't been nearly as successful as ISIS thought it was going to be. They haven't found that indigenous support. They haven't found people who are thinking about joining or giving them that material aid. The U.S. estimates 700 ISIS-K soldiers, whereas Afghan officials think that number is a little bit closer to 1,500, but that's still not a lot of fighters.
And typically, countries aren't very happy when we drop bombs in their nations. I mean, sometimes if it's coalition-led, sure they do. But in this case, moving forward, how does this affect Afghanistan relations?
This was a severe blow to Afghanistan relations because when you look at it, Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, tweeted earlier today that his country was not to be used as kind of U.S. military weapons testing grounds and that his people shouldn't be subject to these massive bombs. So really, it's detrimental, but to a certain degree, there's not much Afghanistan can do to stop it.
And going beyond Afghanistan, what would this mean for diplomatic relations moving forward as an international community?
I think it's definitely a signal that there's kind of different people whose hands are on the trigger now. There's much more of an emphasis that the U.S. has these weapons, and maybe before we weren't willing to use them, but now they're definitely on the table, and they definitely will be used. It's very much kind of a show of force, more so than just trying to kind of clear some caves.
Thanks, Elijah. After the break, we'll talk U.S. foreign policy and the diverging viewpoints within the Trump administration. Stay with us.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Here's your check.
Oh, you got it.
You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Gone. No.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Come on, it's not that hard.
My big man fingers are having a problem with these little tiny buttons.
Whoa, watch it there. Your blood pressure's gonna go through the roof.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to learn how to get it down. Instead, it keeps going up.
High blood pressure can increase the risk for heart attack or stroke. Learn how to keep yours at a healthy range.
Ever hear a voice command? Just say text barbershop to 97779.
That's not what I said.
Just give me that. Now my blood pressure's up.
In the past week, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley have shown different foreign policy intentions in the Middle East. Tillerson said defeating ISIS was first priority, whereas Haley outwardly pushed for regime change in Syria. Elijah Shama is back with us to break down recent U.S. actions abroad and give us a sense of the competing viewpoints behind them. Elijah, thanks for sticking around.
Thanks for having me again.
You're welcome. Clearly, there's a difference in stances here between Tillerson and Haley. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, what we're really seeing is that Nikki Haley is being a lot more bellicose in her language when we talk about kind of what our plans for ISIS are and what our plans for Bashar al-Assad is. Whereas Tillerson has very much said that he wants to defeat ISIS, but he hasn't specified that defeating ISIS means removing Assad from power in Syria, while Haley has gone that extra mile and said that we need to remove Bashar al-Assad from power. That's a big change.
And how does that play into what happened today in Afghanistan and last week in Syria?
I think what we're seeing is that U.S. diplomacy is definitely moving a lot further from soft power than it did during the Obama administration, where definitely there's a focus on military might and saying we have the power to force you to do these things if you're not going to agree with us when we're at the table to talk.
And it seems like Haley and Tillerson are definitely talking in different directions, but in terms of holding similar stances, do they differ on issues of foreign policy?
It's interesting because they differ on issues of Russia. Tillerson's been kind of soft on Russia, while Haley has kind of lambasted Russian diplomats in the UN for alleged human rights abuses in Syria. But what they've both kind of maintained is that defeating ISIS is the #1 priority. The changes are kind of in getting to defeating ISIS, whether it be through removing Bashar al-Assad or just targeting ISIS. That's really the main difference that we're seeing.
And when it comes to the ear of President Trump in foreign policy moving forward, who do you think has more sway, Rex Tillerson or Nikki Haley?
I think Rex Tillerson is kind of vying for more of that power, but I think right now Nikki Haley has that ear. Because when we see kind of Rex Tillerson, this is a man that's the Secretary of State that didn't have a hotel booked for him at the G7. We're seeing kind of people aren't really paying attention to him as much. He's not bringing a press pool wherever he goes, and people are either phoning Jared Kushner or they're going to Nikki Haley when they need something done and they're a foreign leader.
Elijah, thanks for sticking around. Always
No
a pleasure.
While the media's coverage of the Trump administration continues to be a contentious topic, the media is also facing criticism in its coverage of war, particularly following airstrikes in Syria. Talking Point's national correspondent Galat Malamed tells us how the current backlash against the media compares to media coverage of the Iraq War. She's here to discuss. Thank you for being here,
Thanks
Galat.
for having me.
So, what are some of the important takeaways in terms of how the media was able to actually cover the airstrikes?
Yeah, a lot of it, they weren't very critical of the airstrikes itself. More of the criticism of, anytime they were criticizing the situation, it was more of a politically charged criticism against Donald Trump, saying like, oh, he's flip-flopping, oh, who is he talking to about this, kind of criticizing his way of leading as opposed to the action itself. And then when it comes to the airstrikes itself, very like, wow, like he's making big moves now, he's being decisive. Fareed Zakaria even said tonight he became president, so kind of saying like, wow, like he's making moves.
And there's been a lot of journalists criticizing other journalists, specifically if we look back last week during the Syria bombing, Brian Williams kept calling them big, beautiful weapons. So there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, but a lot of other media coverage too. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Brian Williams was definitely one of the biggest criticisms for almost, people were saying he's glorifying this action. Another thing that received a lot of criticism and has almost gone viral in a sense was Fox News, Maria Bartiromo, her interview with Donald Trump, and he was saying how this decision was made over dessert with the president of China, and she even asked him at one point, was this before or after dessert? Kind of, people are saying she's making a mockery of it almost, so a lot of criticism of no one's actually being critical of this, but glorifying it.
Now, the way that reporting has been defined in the modern media era has been through the Iraq War. Now, what are some of the major differences between Iraq War reporting and what we're seeing now in defining these Syrian airstrikes?
Well, I think one of the things, you can compare them, but one of the things that makes it hard to compare is during the time of the Iraq War, right after 9/11, it was almost seen as, almost looked down upon to criticize the war. It was that rally around the flag effect. Because if journalists were criticizing what President Bush was doing after 9/11, they almost seemed unpatriotic. Here it's a little bit different just because the media has been so critical of Donald Trump ever since the election cycle, but definitely the Iraq War is not a good example.
And sometimes when it comes to war coverage, media and journalists are maybe happy-go-lucky and there's a little bit of over-coverage on certain details.
Yes.
What exactly do you think the role of journalism is during times of war or military action?
I think obviously everybody wants to get the scoop first, but you do have to have analysis, and not political commentary analysis necessarily, but you can't take it for what it is. Basically take a lesson from Iraq, which was something that people got a lot of heat for. You have to kind of analyze and be critical, not just repeat what the administration is saying. Obviously, the administration is going to be in favor of the acts that they're doing.
Certainly something we'll be keeping our eye on and watching very carefully.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being here. When we get back, New York State gets its budget through. Who will stand to benefit? Well, we'll give you a hint. Young people. Find out more after the break.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness. I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close.
I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words.
These are not my words.
These are not my words.
Fancy pants peanut butter? A big screen television? You haven't even bought a sofa yet. A motorcycle? When your father finds out, he's gonna flip his shoes with 2 buckles? What do you even need 2 buckles for? Mr. Big Shot, buying whiskey shots for everybody in the bar. From the looks of it, I'd say nobody even remembers. Feed the pig.
When Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Mar-a-Lago last week, the goal was to develop a framework for relations between the U.S. and China. Much of the discussion revolved around the North Korean missile threat. Talking Points contributor Sabrina Maggiore says we can expect that and other current issues to shape U.S. relations with China moving forward. She joins us today. Thank you for being here, Sabrina.
Thanks for having me.
So we saw quite a bit of escalation in North Korea. What does this mean?
Yeah, so there have been a series of events that have sort of escalated these tensions. North Korea tested a missile on April 4th, and Trump took to Twitter after that, and he said, quote, "North Korea is looking for trouble. If China decides to help, that would be great. If not, we will solve the problem without them." And North Korea's state media warned, as it has in the past, that at any sign of U.S. aggression, it would use a nuclear attack. And there's been further escalation. This Saturday, North Korea is celebrating the 105th birth of Kim Il-sung, and Kim Jong-un is expected to test a missile. And as of right now, the U.S. and Japanese Navy are working on joint operations right off the coast of the Korean Peninsula.
And after last week's summit at Mar-a-Lago with Chinese President Xi Jinping, what exactly is President Trump encouraging? What sort of action is he encouraging China to take on North Korea?
So Trump is calling on China to use its position as an economic partner of North Korea to check its nuclear weapons program. North Korea is really dependent on China for both fuel and food, so cutting that off would really cripple the economic progress we've seen in North Korea over recent years. So that's sort of what Trump is advocating for. He wants extra sanctions imposed. China is right now sticking to UN sanctions, but he wants more.
In terms of checking that power and checking their nuclear arsenal, how likely is that China actually steps in to check North Korea?
There have been signs now that China is going to be more proactive in this matter. After Mar-a-Lago, there wasn't much development. Basically, since then, Trump has called Mr. Xi, and Mr. Xi said that Beijing was willing to work with Washington so long as there was a peaceful solution to the escalation of tensions. So right now, we are not 100% sure, but it seems like China is going to be taking a more proactive role in the future.
And as we know, throughout the campaign, President Trump was very critical of China and their currency manipulation. He said they were keeping it too low as to what it should be. But as we know, China is actually manipulating their currency to be stronger than what it should be, which is actually beneficial to the U.S. Are we seeing a change in tone from President Trump on Chinese currency manipulation?
Definitely a change of tone. He's sort of backtracked on what he said. He said during the campaign trail that he would label China as a currency manipulator, and he's backed off of that as of lately. But there's still a huge trade deficit with China, and as of right now, Trump and Mr. Xi have agreed to 100 days of trade talks, and during these trade talks, we can expect a bunch of concessions that will sort of ease the tensions that we've seen. There's not going to be an all-out trade war as we thought.
Certainly a contentious issue we're going to be keeping our eye on. Thank you for being here, Sabrina.
Thanks for having me.
Last week, the state of New York passed a $153 billion budget. Included in it are provisions that raise the age of criminal responsibility and, most notably, free college tuition for students from families earning less than $125,000 a year. Talking Points correspondent Connor White is here to break it down. Connor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we had you on a couple of weeks ago to talk about the same topic. There are a lot of contentious issues in the budget that were holding this entire process up. What exactly made it in?
Well, they were able to reach agreements on several of those contentious issues that we discussed a few weeks ago. Most of them were in favor of Governor Cuomo and Democrats. They were able to raise the age of criminal responsibility, so anyone under the age of 18 will not be tried as an adult in the state of New York. They were able to expand rideshare programs like Uber and Lyft to upstate New York, including the city of Syracuse. But most notably, they were also able to pass the Excelsior Scholarship, which is set to provide free tuition for middle-class income families in New York.
Now, you say free tuition, but does that apply to everyone, and who does that apply to specifically?
It's not everyone. What they mean by middle class is, as of right now, when it is rolled out in 2017, there is the income that they hit has to be under $100,000 a year. As of 2018, it'll be $110,000 a year. And then finally, 2019, which is the final step of the rollout, will be $125,000, and that's when it'll cap off. And that only applies to New York's public colleges and universities. So State Universities of New York doesn't include Syracuse University.
And certainly free tuition will help a lot of people. However, that's not the only cost with college. You have textbooks, you have room and board. Are there any strings attached with this free tuition?
There are a number of requirements that you have to hit. The first is that you have to be moving straight from high school into college and be on track to graduate within 2 to 4 years, and that hasn't really been consistent with the trend of most students, especially low-income ones that have to take time out to go to work or need extra time to study. In addition to that, this is what is known as a last dollar scholarship, which means that it is added on to anything else that any other scholarships that students may have. And many scholarships already cover tuition. So if tuition's covered, this scholarship will not be able to cover other expensive things like you said, room and board, textbooks. But at the end of the day, it's still going to reduce an average of $26,000 a year, and that's a significant increase.
Well, we'll bring you back for next year's budget.
Well,
Connor, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll look into the Supreme Court cases that could be revisited now that Judge Neil Gorsuch is confirmed. Don't miss it.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors. Come on, that's it. Let's go.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Go, okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. We're getting so wet.
They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me. But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
New Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch comes to the court with some important cases coming his way, many of which will be revisiting 4-4 decisions that were made when the court was incomplete. Talking Points contributor Morgan Trout is here to tell us about how this will affect the new dynamics of the court. Morgan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the big 4-4 decisions that are going to be brought back in and be decided on?
The biggest 4-4 case that we're dealing with right now is the Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer, which deals with whether the state constitution preventing their own funds from helping religious institutions and if that interferes with the federal constitution.
Now, if we do have some cases that were heard prior to Neil Gorsuch getting on the court, and now that he's on the court, if they're 4-4, they may have new rounds of arguments. If they do happen to be 4-4, how can we expect Neil Gorsuch to break that tie?
Gorsuch will most likely lean right, and he is often more Christian with his views and believes in like pro-life and anti-euthanasia. So he'll probably lean towards that, and also within campaign finance regulations, he's also way more intense towards those.
So we can definitely expect him to lean towards Scalia's positions in terms of being more conservative. Now, how will some of these cases be affected by his true positions?
Well, his true positions will show that he is a true conservative, and even though people have portrayed him as semi-moderate, he definitely differs from Scalia in he believes in much more intense views, and also he believes in more of like employment contract to prohibit like workers from having different rights, and I know that's a really big problem that they've been having.
Certainly a strict originalist. Well, Morgan, always glad to have you back. It's been a while. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Here at Talking Points, we value in-depth coverage of the world's most pressing issues.
But some stories inevitably don't capture mainstream attention.
This week, we have 3 important stories you may have missed.
It is no longer legal to eat dog and cat meat in Taiwan. On Tuesday, the island passed a landmark piece of legislation that expanded their animal protection laws. The bill also raises the fines and increases the length of prison terms for animal cruelty.
A string of animal abuse cases in Taiwan last year, including a video of soldiers abusing a dog, resulted in increased public support for the legislation. Animal rights activists hope Taiwan's legislation will put pressure on other Asian countries where the dog meat trade still exists.
On Monday, scientists released the results of an aerial survey of the Great Barrier Reef, which showed severe bleaching for the second time in the last year. Bleached coral has expelled the algae that gives it its color due to warming ocean temperatures, leaving it weaker and completely white.
It is worth noting that the report makes a distinction between bleached coral and dead coral. The primary driver of coral bleaching is warming ocean temperatures due to climate change, and the report urges immediate action to attempt to reverse those effects.
Amazon is being forced to reimburse $70 million worth of unauthorized in-app purchases as a result of a lawsuit filed by the Federal Trade Commission in 2014. The suit alleges that Amazon did not do enough to make it clear to users when they were spending real money in apps, which resulted in children spending their parents' money without consent.
The ruling follows similar lawsuits against Google and Apple that held companies need to be more clear about getting a customer's consent before charging them. After a quick break, we'll end the show with a look ahead. Stay with us.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
In the weeks ahead, two major things are catching our eye. First is the Supreme Court of the United States.
With Neil Gorsuch now on the court, let's take a look ahead to the next Supreme Court nomination, whenever that may be. In future nominations, with a Republican majority and the lack of a filibuster, President Trump has the potential to nominate and confirm some of the most conservative justices the court has ever seen. So, mark November 6, 2018 on your calendars, the date of the midterm elections. With any potential nominee prior, Republicans should have their way. If they want to avoid their court nightmare until 2020, however, Democrats need to reclaim a Senate majority. Across the aisle, Republicans need to maintain their majority to strengthen their spot on the court. If we take a look at the seats up for grabs, the chances don't look promising for Democrats. 23 seats are up for the Democrats and only 9 for Republicans. This is what to watch for in the next year and a half. The struggle over winning back voters that were lost over the last several years. Either way, each party must live with the consequences of their strategy.
The rallying cry from GOP lawmakers on the Hill this week: Sean Spicer must go. Spicer's comments about Hitler having refrained from using chemical weapons against his own people in response to questions about the attacks by the Assad regime in Syria set off a media firestorm over the press secretary's decorum. President Trump recently called out his staff in the New York Post over a spat between Bannon and the establishmentarians of the administration. Will Trump bring his qualms with Spicer's performance into the public discussion as he did with Bannon? How will the administration react and salvage what's left of Spicer's image as an asset? What are the next steps for Priebus and company? The internal strife is becoming a public show, and changing a critical staff position so early in the administration could be detrimental to the Trump team. I'll be looking ahead to how the administration will shift its tone and demeanor towards the press in the coming week, and I certainly expect the press secretary position to turn over in the near future.
That's all we have for tonight.
In the meantime, check out CitrusTV.com for all things Talking Points. You'll find episode segments and blog posts on our personal page.
Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week. For Talking Points, I'm Mike Riccardi.
And I'm Josh Carney.